Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us for our webinar. We're just going to give it a minute or two for everyone to jump on, and then we will get started. It's always that fun moment. I should have come with like a Christmas carol or something that we should have played in the introductory minute or two, just to be like, yeah.
Bit of meditational kazoo, maybe.
Oh, there we go. That's now meditational kazoos. God, I love it. All right, we might get things underway. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming along today's webinar, our final webinar of 2023. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners across all of the lands that we're dialing into this webinar from today. I'm dialing in from the lands of the Gadigal people, and I'd like to pay my respect to elders past, present and emerging. We'd also like to acknowledge any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people we have either joining this webinar live or watching an on-demand recording of the webinar. Welcome to our last webinar of the year. I don't know about any of you, I'm definitely in holiday mode, as is visible by my background of decorations and holly to try and feign some kind of Christmas cheer, but my brain is definitely in holiday mode. But yes, welcome to our webinar, our last webinar of the year. The theme, or the name I should say, of today is an Intopia Carol, past, present and future. We're going to do our best to get into the holiday spirit, although I did notice that one of our panelists for today's webinar literally described this webinar on his LinkedIn as, are you bored and looking for meaning in your life? Well, you won't find it in this webinar. So let's see how well this is going to go.
That would be Neil, wouldn't it?
Oh, 100%.
Honesty is the best policy.
So in the theme of the name of the webinar, we are going to be looking back into the year that was, going down the ghost of Christmas past and present. We are going to cheat a little bit and combine both of those at the same time because we do only have an hour today. And then we will, with the ghost of Christmas future, be looking at everything that potentially lies ahead in the digital accessibility and inclusion landscape in 2024. Just to properly introduce ourselves, my name is Crispy, aka Chris Pycroft, aka Ebenezer Scrooge, who is going to do things with ghosts and carols and holidays, apparently, and try and keep our panelists on track today. I have no idea how well this is going to go. This could quite possibly be one of our best webinars ever, just to see where our four panelists do take it. So strap yourselves in. I'm sure the next hour is going to be an absolute adventure. To properly introduce them, our four panelists that we have today is Russ Weakley, who looks after all of our work in training and education. We have Neil Jarvis, who looks after all of our work in strategy and policy. We have Charlie Parker, who leads our work in equitable research and design. And we have Julie Grundy, who leads all of our audit practice work. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we start. This is largely going to be a conversational format, but you will have the opportunity to ask any of our panelists questions at any time. So please do submit them through the Q&A feature that is on your screen. You will find them there and we'll get to those, as many of those as we can at the end of the webinar. We'd also like to acknowledge that today's webinar's live captioning is being provided by AI Media. A big thank you to AI Media, who have supported all of our captioning this year with all of our webinars. You have done fantastic. Thank you so much. And if you do need to hop out for any reason during the middle of the webinar, we will be posting a recording of this webinar, hopefully early next week, on our YouTube channel, and you'll find it there. With that, I am going to get straight into the questions. There was a lot that happened in 2023, and we'll be touching on some of that over the first few questions. The first one, probably, I guess, the elephant in the room, the most obvious one, I guess, from a digital accessibility perspective, was WCAG 2.2. The first biggest update to the guidelines in was it 5.5 years?
Like that, yeah.
Yeah, something like that. Julie, I'm going to throw it over to you first of all. For those that might not be familiar with it, can you just give us a bit of an overview in terms of what WCAG 2.2 actually is, and kind of what was in it for the first time?
Yeah. So if you missed it or haven't had an opportunity to look into it yet, the WCAG standard has been updated to version 2.2. It's got a bunch of stuff where it's kind of filling some gaps that people had noticed in 2.0 and 2.1, I feel. So we've got a bunch of stuff that, honestly, if you've got a well-designed site that's been updated recently, you're probably already passing a bunch of these criteria. So focus shouldn't be obscured by other things. You should be able to see it, not have it disappear behind other things. You should have a minimum target size of 24 pixels. If you have a help feature of any sort on your site, it needs to be named consistently and positioned consistently. These are the kinds of things that are problems in a lot of legacy sites. So if you needed an excuse to go back and review those or throw out those sites, this is your chance. Just say, oh no, WCAG 2.2, like, yeah, we have to throw out that terrible old site and make a new one. The big one though, I think, for that may end up having a huge impact, I think, is accessible authentication. That's has a AA version and a AAA version. The AA version does not make you get rid of all of your captures, but the AAA version does. And again, if you've been looking for an excuse to ditch capture, now's your chance. It did get a loophole carved out for it at the AA so that people aren't suddenly, you know how many sites have captures on them. You're not all suddenly going to be failing WCAG on every page that has a capture on it. But I feel like this is the time to start investigating what the alternatives are for accessible authentication. And I would really love to hear, I'm looking forward to once people with experience in security and authentication of sites have a chance to kind of digest this criteria and sort of give us some advice on how can we do accessible authentication that is both accessible and actually doing the job of authentication of making sure that people are who they say they are. So I'm kind of looking forward to seeing what happens there. And if I know you and you know about security, I will be badgering you for information about it soon.
Yeah, security, I think, has been one of those big topics in general. I think this year, not just accessibility.
Yes, exactly. Like everyone's starting to go, oh, we should pay attention to that. Yeah. I'm going to put, Andrew's put in chat earlier versions of WCAG, and I'm going to put in chat a link to, there is a nice summary of what's new. So if you haven't been across it yet, have a quick look at that. They've also given, I think what's quite nice is W3C has added some like personas. So who is affected by these changes and why are these changes needed, which I think is really lovely.
Awesome. Thanks so much for that, Julie. Really appreciate it. Neil, I'm going to throw it over to you. I look at things from a digital accessibility perspective, particularly around policy. And there seems to be a bit of an emergence, I think, with organizations starting to think about it a little bit more. So I'm just kind of curious to hear from you, reflecting on your work for the year. Do you think there's been that kind of change from organizations at that level? And do you think organizations are starting to get a bit more strategic with how they think about accessibility?
I think they definitely are. I think it's part of a longer process, though, than just the last 12 months. But I think there's a clear direction of travel, and that travel is taking us in the direction of organizations recognizing that they really need to up their game when it comes to accessibility for all the reasons that most of the people I'm sure here would appreciate, whether that be legal, economic, or just the right thing to do. A lot of organizations have been starting to get that argument over the last 5-10 years in particular. I mean, it's been happening for a while, but you can definitely see an upshift in the number of organizations who are getting it now. I don't know that 2023 saw a paradigm shift in any way in that respect, but it definitely continued the journey in the way that it's been going. And what we are seeing now is organizations realizing that if they want to be serious about accessibility, and a lot of organizations do, then they need to start embedding the accessibility skill set within their organizations. It's no good just doing something once or twice, thinking about it for a while, then moving on to the next big thing. Oh, we've done accessibility. Let's go and do, I don't know, youth or something like that. Doesn't really work that way. We always tell our clients that accessibility is a journey. It's never actually done. But the better you get at it, the more likely you are to achieve it, if that makes sense. So I think that what we're seeing more and more now is organizations recognize that just as sustainability and security and privacy are things that matter to them as organizations, more so than they did 10 years ago, and certainly more so than they did 20 years ago, accessibility is starting to get thought of in the same way as well. And conversely, they're starting to learn what happens if that doesn't take place. So we have seen some organizations this year in particular who have, and I don't just mean people that we work with, I mean generally in the sphere of IT and technology and online content and online services. We've seen examples where organizations have reduced their accessibility activities. They may have got rid of, in one famous case, their entire accessibility team overnight. If that happens, you will see consequences of that. And one of those consequences will be that the accessibility of the platform that you are using will start to deteriorate, and it will start to deteriorate quite rapidly. And organizations don't want to be the people that do that. So the organizations that care about this sort of thing and see accessibility as a value and not just as a good thing to do, are beginning to recognize that you need to invest in accessibility just as you need to invest in security and things like that.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Neil. And I think when you're referring to organizations that get rid of their entire accessibility teams overnight, I think those kinds of organizations get a big X next to their name, pun intended.
I couldn't possibly comment, Chris, but
I don't know what you mean. With that, I'm going to pick up on something that you said, Neil, and throw it over to Russ. Russ, you obviously look after a lot of our training, particularly with our clients. And I'm just wondering if you've got any insights about some of the most common issues that you're finding in training sessions, that you're doing anything in particular that our clients are talking with you about.
Yeah, so I'm seeing patterns that we've all seen just becoming exacerbated over the last few years. And we're seeing a fundamental shift of designers and developers becoming more abstracted away from HTML, as weird as that sounds. So designers are moving more and more into Figma and design system world. Developers are moving more and more into React or abstracted, JavaScript libraries. And this little middle ground, which we used to sit in for years, where people would design but also cut and build and live in HTML, is gone. And so whenever we're doing training now, we're constantly being surprised that we have to go back to basics, like what is semantic markup? Why is this important? Accessible forms, like really basic stuff that was well known in the sort of early era, but it's sort of become lost over time. So that's probably the biggest area we're seeing. The second biggest one is actually the communication between designers and developers. So a lot of times we come in and we do training for designers or developers, but often that's not enough. What's missing is actually these teams communicating. And so what we're seeing is teams having to move faster, developers having to move quicker in sprints. Designers will come in and design something and throw it over the fence to developers. And what's missing is that conversation, and annotations are starting to fill that. A lot of people are now talking about, design-based annotations like Figma, being able to communicate key information to engineers. But in reality, while that's great, the most important thing is still clear communication between both parties. So they're the two big things I'm seeing out in the wild.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Russ. Charlii, I'm going to bring you into the conversation here. I know you get to work directly with our users as a part of a lot of the work that you do with your user research sessions in particular. I'm just kind of curious, based on the feedback that you're hearing in those kinds of sessions, do you think that like online products and services are actually making good steps or good progress in terms of making things more accessible and inclusive? And if there are any barriers, what are those barriers that you think that users are talking about more?
Yeah, I do get to work directly with users, which is my favorite part of my job. Working directly with such diverse user groups does give me a front row seat into how online products and services are shaping up in terms of accessibility and inclusivity. It's still a bit of a mixed bag. One recurring issue is inconsistency in how accessibility standards are applied across different platforms. And users are often hitting roadblocks with things such as touch target size, really important for people with dexterity related disabilities if they're whether they're trying to hit a button with a mouse or a touch target on a phone, really important for button sizes and things like that, something that we're seeing as consistent issues. Interactive elements such as address fields with autocomplete features. We've seen some really nice ones throughout the year, and we've seen some that are still a little bit janky that need to be worked on a little bit, but it's something that happens enough that every time we come up against one in a user session, if we're with a screen reader user, they'll get to the address field and say, oh, these don't usually work. So there's almost an expectation that they're not going to. We've seen a bit of an increase in the working better, which has been nice. And search functions that users have to put really specific information in to bring up relevant results, which can be really problematic because a lot of users just want to go directly to search, put in what they're looking for and have it hit where they want to be, which is how a good search function should work. There's often incompatibilities where websites and apps don't play nice with screen readers or magnification tools, where mobile phones don't allow for pinch zoom, or for text to be selected and highlighted so that it can be read out by text-to-speech tools. And these can be fairly common issues that we see, and they can make it really difficult for users to interact when they're trying to do work online. One constant theme is the need for smooth compatibility with assistive technologies. So something we hear about consistently is the dreaded update, where people have worked with a product or a website and it's worked fine, and then there's been an update made and it's essentially broken everything that's good about it. A lot of our testing is done online via Zoom, and Zoom's had a recent update which affects iPhone users. So it will turn down a screen reader. So when someone's trying to interact during a call, it doesn't quite mute the screen reader, but it turns it down so that it doesn't interrupt the meeting, but it doesn't help the user who's trying to use it. And it's also causes dropout during screen share and things like that. So it's really important for organizations to consider when they're making updates, the impact of accessibility that it might have. It's not just about new products that are being built. So we are moving forward, and I think overall there has been incremental improvements, and there's definitely been an increased interest in our equitable design and research services this year, which is really, really good, but there's still a lot of work to be done.
Awesome, thanks for that, Charlii. Julie, I might bring you in here as kind of our head of audit practice, and auditing still probably makes up, I'd say, about half of our work that Intopia gets throughout the year this year. Some of the issues that you're finding, are they the same as what front-end users are experiencing, or is our auditing team finding different issues when they're doing things like accessibility audits?
Everything that I'm seeing reflects exactly what Charlii and Russ was saying about these kinds of issues. So I'm going to be a little bit brave. I made a little dashboard and I'm going to share it. If I can share my screen. Let's see how this goes. So I'll describe what I've got here. So this is just a little statistics for all the issues we've raised over 2023. And I've got them sorted by success criteria. So what have we got? Total of nearly 8,000 issues raised across all of our work, of which page 1367 are about info and relationships. If you are not familiar in depth with success criteria, which is not everybody's job to do that, but this speaks directly to what Russ was saying about how good HTML has been abstracted away from the day-to-day lives of most working developers and designers. Info and relationships is about making sure that things that are visually obvious to someone who has full what's the word, 20/20 vision, can actually see and understand what the design is telling them. And that's not represented in the markup in the HTML, so that people aren't aware of what's going on if they're using assistive technology, such as, most importantly, a screen reader. So, you know, it can be visually obvious that all of these radio buttons are related to each other. They're in a group. This text is big and bold and styled that way with CSS because it's a heading. This link in a menu is styled differently because it's representing the current page. And so these are all the kind of issues where we're like, oh, you need to kind of adjust your code to actually match what the visual signification is. You'll probably have noticed that the second item here is called not applicable. That is because I did not filter out our non-WCAG issues that we raised. I ran out of time on my dashboard, but I'll just have you know that we do actually, there's more to accessibility than WCAG compliance. As Charlie well knows, you can be technically compliant and yet still actually not very usable for people who are using assistive tech, people with disabilities. So that's our kind of grab bag of those. Next up would be focus order is a big problem. And I think that that's sort of showing this rise in web apps. Navigation through, if you were using a keyboard to navigate through a nice e-commerce site or a content site, we hardly ever find problems with focus order. It's when you have interactive content where someone presses a filter and it updates a whole pile of content. We have focus order problems there. And probably the next third one is name role value, which is about actually when you've got something complex, is it accurately described in the accessibility API of the browser? And so that's a much more technical kind of one. But it does come down to this idea that, again, people don't know their HTML well enough to accurately describe what they're building to people who are using technology to interface with this rather than just yieldy eyeballs. I've also got some statistics about, again, I've included my non-WCAG ones here, but of these issues, most of these are level A issues. So we are still hitting these really basic kinds of things, which is a shame, but also I feel like, oh, well, those are the ones that are kind of a little bit easier to fix. So, you know, that's potential there for people to really sort it out. So we're seeing about 60% of them are at level A, 25% at AA. And I do think like AAA, we've got 1%, but that's because people hardly ever ask us to audit AAA. And I think probably a lot of those not applicable ones there's some overlap there with AAA. We're like, look, you're not auditing, you're not trying to comply with AAA, but this is definitely going to cause a problem for people. So maybe just have a look at that and see if maybe you can sort that out for us. So that's that. Any questions about what I'm showing here?
There's
Those
one here.
non-applicables, Julie, make me feel super validated in the work that I do.
Yes, exactly, right? Like this, not everything is about WCAG.
No.
Julie, there's a question in chat which says,
Yes.
and now Pat's asked, which is nice dashboard, Julie. Are these counts scary? Are we seeing more or less than last year? Are we getting better?
That is a good question. Let me, well, I guess it's sort of reflective of the audits that we've been asked to do. So sort of if you take it as an aggregate, but I might just unshare my screen and go have a quick look at last year's statistics.
Yeah, no, I've actually got those open on my screen, Julie.
Oh, do you? If you have them, then yeah, go for it.
The one big change that it looks like, particularly for audits and clients that we're looking at, a lot of the top 5 issues are actually largely the same. as what they were last year. I think probably the one big area that we're seeing improvement in by the looks of it is focus visible. And I don't know whether that's because design has come a bit more into play, particularly with WCAG 2.2, but based on a quick look at the numbers, that's probably the one area that seems like we're getting a lot more improvement in at the moment.
And I do think at least some of that must be because of Chrome improving their default focus indicator and everyone else going, oh, that's really nice. Maybe we should make something similar. Like if you're going to change the focus indicator style, you should at least make it better than Chrome's. Like, and that's a tall order. It might just be making sure that, I know that for myself, if I'm building something, I just make the other browsers do the same focus indicator as Chrome. I find that a pretty reliable one. It's got that double ring, it's got white and black. So whatever you've got as your background color, it's gonna have contrast. Like there's no getting away from it. It's got something there. And it works really nicely in if people have got forced colors in their like high contrast modes or something. It shows up there as well. So it's really, really nice.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Julie. Just a reminder for anyone that is joining us, if you have any questions that you'd like to ask, please do drop them in through the Q&A feature, and we will have time for those at the end. We have now been through, I guess, the ghost of Christmas past and present, and we're now going to look to the future and see have a bit of a think about what we think is going to happen in digital accessibility in 2024. One of the things I'm going to touch on first is that with it being a big year, there was an announcement, I think, made just last week, I want to say it was, that the Australian Human Rights Commission, as a part of International Day of People with a Disability, announced that they were going to update the Disability Discrimination Act's web advisory notes. And insert humble brag here, Intopia. Intopia is the organisation that the Human Rights Commission will be partnering with. So that's something that we're really, really proud of, and we're really, really looking forward to doing that work next year. It is going to be the first big update to that note in a decade. So really important update. But I think that kind of ties in with my question, particularly to you, Neil, is that we are seeing organisations like the Human Rights Commission talk about changes to policies and strategies more publicly in recent times. Do you think that that's something that's going to continue into the future, that we are going to see these organisations, whether they be government or other form of public organisations, whether it be big corporates, are we going to start seeing them actually talk about their work in accessibility more and actually detail out in their strategies, their statements about the work that they're either currently doing or that they are going to do to be more accessible and inclusive? Yes,
I think that's undoubtedly going to be the case. Everybody wants to be on the winning team, don't they? And when you see organisations like the Human Rights Commission or any other arm of government, or indeed any large corporate organisation, any large influencer of wherever they come from, when they start making statements about what's important to them, then others want to do the same. And there's no question in my mind that we will see repercussions of that. I think, for instance, we already get a lot of times when we're talking with clients, and it doesn't matter whether they're in the government sector or the private sector or something in between. One of the most common questions we get asked is, can you give us an example of how a similar organization to us is doing what you're proposing we do? And that is because they want, for several reasons. One is that they want to know how their competitors have done it, or how the people they can best be compared to have done it. But they also want to know how someone who is working in a similar field and sector to them has already succeeded, so that they can kind of cut corners and take shortcuts, because we all want to do that, don't we, in life? So that's, to me, a good indication that when you get organizations stepping up and saying, we have expectations and we are going to make a point of celebrating accessibility, others will want to do the same thing too. So I don't think they will be alone. We already see examples of when organizations have done a lot of hard work to raise their game with accessibility, the next thing they have to do is tell people about it. Otherwise, no one will know. So it's really that they find it really important to be able to take their customers or their users or their clients or whoever they may happen to be through the process of making the most of the accessibility improvements that they've made. That might be through pointing out successes through an accessibility statement on the website. It might be drawing attention to expectations in a policy. It might be promoting accessibility internally in their newsletters with their own staff, that sort of thing. Lots of ways it can happen, but yes, it will happen more.
Awesome, thanks for that, Neil. Charlii, I might pass it over to you. I'm just kind of curious to hear from you. Do you think that organizations are now starting to have a bit of a think about the diversity of their users that they engage with in things like user research? And what do you think organizations in particular, when they're starting to map out and think about how they're going to approach this next year, what do you think are some of the things that organizations should be thinking about?
Yeah, we're definitely seeing more organizations adopting a more inclusive design practices and being more open to including people with disabilities and people from other marginalized groups who might be disproportionately affected when accessing content online, in their research, in their design, and bringing them in sooner. We're having, people brought in at prototype and design, and at concept stages and things like that, where people from the people represented on our panel are really getting a seat at the table from the start of the design process. So that's really, really encouraging. There's definitely a growing realization amongst companies about the importance of accessibility, and that it's not just about technical compliance, as Julie showed with her non-applicables, which are my all applicables. That they're really, really important, and just as important as technical compliance, making sure that products are actually usable and that they're easy to use and easy to access, and people can get things done that they need to. And I think that our clients have really seen that it genuinely makes a difference for everyone. It's not just the people in those groups. When they're making these improvements, it actually helps their site or their apps as a whole. Along with people with disability, organisations should start to consider factors such as cultural, language, access or socioeconomic barriers, age, all of those things. People come from such diverse backgrounds, and it's including all of those people and all of those voices. And we are seeing more requests to include people from these groups in our testing, which has been fantastic. One thing that we have seen this year is more, and hopefully more into next year as well, is more in-house design teams taking on this research themselves. A lot of them using Russ's conducting user research with people with disabilities training course as a bit of a floaty device. They're starting to dip their toes in and learn about how to move past some of their own fears and their own biases and take on the research themselves with our cohort of people, which has been great. So organisations are definitely looking at things through more of an equitable lens, and we're really excited to be supporting that and hopefully seeing more and more of that into 2024 as well.
Awesome. Thanks so much for that, Charlii. And just a quick call out for anyone that is joining into the webinar today. This is probably your last opportunity if you want to get questions in for any of our panelists, so please do submit them through the Q&A feature. And if we've got any time left, we will do our best to get to those. Russ, I'm going to throw it over to you next. I think over the past few years, there's probably been quite a lot of change in terms of how training gets delivered. And I think this was something that probably started obviously during COVID, when we all went online and remote, and things like face-to-face training kind of, I guess, fell to the wayside as everybody started working from home full time. And so some change really around training started to happen then. And obviously there's been a lot of change with a lot of organizations across the board, particularly this year, that they've restructured kind of the teams that it is that they need and the skill sets that they're looking for, and potentially even how they might even provide professional development to their own workforces. So I'm just kind of curious to hear from you. What do you think are kind of the trends or the things that you expect to see from a training and education perspective when it comes, or even just in general in 2024, and particularly from a digital accessibility perspective, what do you think are going to be some of the things that are going to come up most in your training?
Well, I'd first like to say it's very bold to assume that there'll be any sort of society left in 2024, because we all know that we're heading towards total collapse. And I'm hoping that humanity will be gone pretty soon. But let's assume we are still around, dragging through the next year. There's probably a bunch of things that we're seeing. The first one is because, as you said, with COVID, everyone's decentralized, they're working in different places. And so we are just seeing not only the move to sort of Zoom-based online training, but just that teams are now scattered across countries where they used to be sort of sitting in offices. And despite what upper management and companies are doing, people aren't going to come back and work in the city. They don't care. So I don't think that's going to change at all. But we're seeing a couple of other trends. One is a few years ago, all of our training was pretty well off the shelf. And now people are coming to us asking for more customized training. And that sort of suggests that they're more sophisticated now. They're coming with a better understanding of exactly what their needs are. We're also seeing cross-discipline training more. So a lot of traditional, including our own, is sort of training designers, developers, managers. Whereas a lot of training nowadays we're seeing is cross-discipline. So how do you work with designers, developers, managers in sprints, and trying to bake accessibility into some processes. So that's a big change. Another one is just this idea of right training at the right time. So this idea that we can come in at a certain point, anyone when they're training can come in at a certain point when they need it the most. So they're the biggest changes that we're sort of seeing out there in the market. Again, assuming there's a society left for 2024.
Well, I'm personally keeping my fingers crossed, but you know me, I'm always an optimist, and you have to deal with me every single day. So there's got to be someone that kind of counters that. So cool. Thanks for that, Russ. Do appreciate your insights there. Julie, I'm going to throw this last question over to you. I think, you know, obviously an audit is an audit and potentially can only be done in so many ways, but I'm just kind of curious as to how you're seeing organizations kind of apply the learnings that they're getting from things like audits. And I know we do things like debrief sessions and stuff like that, particularly with our clients as well. Do you kind of notice how any kind of positive changes around how particularly our clients that we work with are kind of taking those and applying those practical learnings, and how it is that things like results from accessibility audits and things like that might get used in the new year?
Yeah, definitely. I feel like there's been over time like a real shift from, oh, we must just tick the box. We've got to get an audit. Do we have to do anything with the results? No. We got an audit done. That's accessibility completed. Now we're sort of seeing people sort of really look through and sort of say, okay, what if we actually change some of our processes so that we could avoid these problems in the first place? If Russ is wrong and society does continue, I wouldn't mind being put out of a job if accessibility shifts so far left that audits aren't really are just like, we've already done everything. We've got all of our strategy in place. We've done our user research. We've done our training, and I just sit there and go, yeah, well done. That would be lovely. So reduce my workload, please. Shift left with your accessibility. I'd love that. I do think that there is also the other big shift that I'm seeing is that browsers are taking accessibility, I think taking more responsibility in the accessibility area and this HTML and CSS standards. So we've got things in CSS like the forced colors query. And it's like, look, you don't need to detect if someone is using a high contrast theme or something like that. It's not really any of your business, but you know people are going to do it. So test it, and here is a way that you can give CSS specifically to that group and say, look, it's mostly fine, but we needed to add a few tweaks for you. And that can be done with CSS or JavaScript to just sort of say, look, it's there. If people use it, cool. If people don't, cool. You don't have to detect if there's an accessibility issue happening, you just assume that, yeah, people are going to be using assistive tech because it's getting built into the browser, it's getting built into the platform. People are using it and learning about it, whether or not they think of themselves as disabled. They're there and sort of going, oh, look at all these cool features. Like, so I would like to see people focus less on, oh no, here is this audience who has a special need I need to cater to this edge case. And it's more like, no, everybody deserves to have the browsing experience that they prefer. And some people, that's because of disability. Okay, cool. And Neil, correct me on any of this if I'm getting out of line, but I would like to just have browsers provide these tools for everybody, and make them widely available. So if you need them, you need them. They're there.
I think the really interesting thing that you say there, I like a lot the idea that accessibility is shifting left, and eventually there'll be no role for the likes of us, and we'd all like that. Do you know, we've been told that for 30 years.
Yeah.
When
I live in hope. I live in hope. One day, you and me, cocktails on a beach.
Yeah,
and,
absolutely. We're doing it anyway. But,
yeah, we might as well do it retired, right?
Yeah. when Russ's Armageddon happens, that's where we're going to be.
Yeah.
But I think, having said that, though, yes, we've been told that for 30 years. But actually, what has happened is the goalposts are shifting and have shifted over that time. So the things that we were concerned about and bothered about and worried about in 1995, they have largely been addressed, not entirely, but largely they've been addressed. But the things that are happening to us at the beginning of 2024 will take some sorting out, and will take some resolving. We'll get those done, and then by the time we get to 2034, we'll be on to the next things that we haven't even thought of yet. But it will mean that we can actually resolve issues that are currently problems, and then go after things that at the moment are seen as being too hard, but eventually won't be too hard. They'll be the things that become our bread and butter. So shifting left, that's what it means to me, is that it allows us to get those goalposts moved further and further.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I don't I think at number 4 on my list was non-text content, alt text. I live in hope that AI might fix this. At the moment, I'm like, no. But if it did, I'd be pretty happy. Like, I don't particularly get a lot of joy out of telling people you need to put alt text on this image. If that problem got solved, that would free me up to deal with other things that are potentially more interesting and exciting. So yeah, I'm probably team optimist here. Maybe a little too willfully. It's a choice I make. But on the other hand, you know, if Russ is right and it all falls apart, at least we'll get a chance to rest.
Well, AI is busy working out how to bring down the world, so I don't know if it's going to have time to work on your alt text. Sorry, Julie.
Yeah, maybe.
And this is the part where, you know, it goes into the disarray exactly as we thought that it would. I'm surprised it took 40 minutes.
I know.
To be perfectly honest.
We're professionals. We had
Yeah,
questions to answer.
Yeah.
We're doing well. Last question, which I'm going to throw open to the floor on this one. We've touched on a lot of things already, but is there anything specific, providing that the world survives? I'd much preferred Neil's analogy being like, oh yeah, we're going to have new things to work on in 10 years. Personally, I'm much more down that path than as opposed to doom and gloom. But is there anything in particular that you think that you're looking forward to, either just through your work in general or on the horizon of digital accessibility next year?
I'm looking forward to people. I'm looking forward to organizations, and we're seeing it now, and I want to see more of it. Organizations saying, right, you've given us, if you like, a blueprint for how to move forward. Now let's talk about how we can make that blueprint happen. One of the reasons why we need a strategic approach to accessibility is because people are no longer in careers for 40 years anymore like they once were. And there's a lot of churn in organizations. So organizations acquire a lot of skill and expertise, and then they lose it again when people move on to the next challenge in their professional lives. And what we do with organizations is to help them capture that knowledge and capture that expertise and bake it into their ways of working. And so when an organization says, okay, we've lost some key people over the last wee while, but we've still got the ability to carry on, that I see as a good example of that's where things are going right. So I want to see more of that. I expect to see more of that. And that's certainly where I'm putting a lot of my efforts.
Sort of similar in terms of like employment. I feel like I'm starting to see a little bit of a shift where people are starting to look at the software that they use to do their jobs. And it's like, well, is that accessible? Because how can we employ people with disabilities if our digital tools are not accessible? So and it might be because I'm paying attention to it more that I feel like I'm seeing some evidence that people are thinking about it. So maybe it's all confirmation bias, but I think it's really important. I'm like, yeah, this is the software we use all day, every day. It's not, accessibility isn't just about lolcats and social media. It's about how we do our jobs, how we make a living. So I'm keen, I'm hopeful. So yeah.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to more organisations realising that they can include people with disability and people from diverse communities in their testing and from the get-go. And it's again, it's not just a tick box. It's and seeing the value in what people have to say. We had some members of our panel at Web Directions earlier this year, about a month or so ago, and people got to sit down. People that were at the conference got to sit down and talk to them, and just absolutely fascinated about how they use things and why they use things and what their needs are. And all the people that sat down got so much out of those sessions and sort of ran off to tell the rest of their organisation about it. So more and more people, including people with disabilities, people from our panel, and taking their opinions on board is what I'm really looking forward to next year.
Cool. For me, I suppose it would just be, even though annotations are crude and they're seen as a silver bullet and they're not going to solve anything, even just the fact that people are starting to use tools like that and are starting to go, oh, we can add accessibility to that. Anything that happens like that is a good thing, I'd say, because it just sparks conversation. So yeah, to me, annotations are one big thing that I'm excited about, even though they're overhyped and dangerous. They still have a good place in sparking conversation. And I think we'd all agree the best thing ever to happen is overlays, accessibility overlays. Lots of them in 2024.
Oh, we got so close. We got so close. I'm like, oh, wow, that answer was surprisingly diplomatic for us. I'm like, surely that can't end there. And yeah, well done. On that note, I think we are going to wrap this webinar up there before, dare I say, we go down the overlay rabbit hole, which we could probably spend about 6 hours talking about just on its own. I do want to thank our panelists for joining us today, Russ, Charlii, Julie, and Neil, for all of their insights that they've provided today. If you do want to catch a recording of this webinar, which many of you are, it seems like more of you are watching us on demand than live these days. So hello, wherever you are. I hope you've got a nice coffee or drink in your hand as you've enjoyed this webinar, but you will get to watch this anytime on demand on our YouTube channel. Big thank you to AI Media for their captioning of the webinar. Thank you to everybody who's joined our webinars this year. It has been fantastic having your company, and we will see you again for our next webinars in 2024. Thank you so much, everybody. Happy holidays.
Bye.
Bye.